G'day, it's probably time that I share with you that part of the reason why I've been quiet on the channel is because I have played 4th edition Age of Sigmar as well as Spearhead. Now, I can't tell you where, I can't tell you when, but what I can tell you is what my first experience was all about in both of those formats. Now, a lot of information has come out through Warhammer community that wasn't available to me at that particular time. So you're probably already at a head start compared to where I was at when I very first experienced it. But I'm going to share with you all of the things that I kind of learned along the way. Mindful that some things I can't share at this particular point. So I'm going to share as much as I can at this moment, but know that this won't be my only 4th edition and my only Spearhead video. So there'll be plenty of stuff coming along the way. But really, what I'm going to share with you is kind of take what you might have learned from Warhammer community, maybe what you've seen on the Dallas Open videos, whether it's the celebrity match or the masterclass, and put my own spin and my own experience and my own learnings on this particular video. Now, I do have a lot of notes as I kind of sat on the train trying to bring this all to life. Like, I'll probably be scattered talking about all these random experiences and what happened here and what happened there. So I'm going to try to make this as succinct as possible, but know that both games were a lot of fun. I'm very excited about the future. It's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. Iterations will happen. But overall, I'm very excited about the future of Age of Sigmar and through Spearhead too, which is maybe where I'll start. And I'm sure you're going to have plenty of comments about this new format. For the people who maybe haven't experienced Spearhead, maybe you didn't watch the celebrity match, or maybe you haven't really caught up to things. The very quick download is that Warhammer Spearhead is a smaller version of Age of Sigmar. Now, it's not exactly what you know from Match Play or Path to Glory. It is a stripped down, simplified version of the game. It does share a lot of commonality between full Age of Sigmar as well as the Spearhead, but there are some very differences that you'll need to know, and it's a nice stepping stone from Spearhead up to eventually Match Play. But basically, in a nutshell, you've got your Spearhead boxes, which you may also know as Vanguard boxes that are being rebranded. They are basically the models you play with. So they are the forces. So if you look at Games Workshop's website right now or your local game store, you'll already get an idea of what Spearhead army composure is going to look like. And maybe you saw that game with Claudio Castagnoli as well as Kip Sabian from AEW, the pro wrestling company. Don't talk to me about the quality. Yes, I know there were some improvements that could have happened, but I enjoyed the game overall, and it was a nice introduction to the game, although, yes, it could have been done better. But what is Spearhead? What was my first experience? And I guess because I had never played 4th edition at that point, so Spearhead was my first introduction to the new game system and the new rules. There was a lot of unlearning and relearning when it comes to what I knew about 3rd edition, what I need to know about 4th edition, unlearning some of those things that I kind of assume along the way, whether it's faction or rules interactions or how to play the particular game. And then you add the knowledge of Spearhead. Spearhead is played on a smaller battlefield. It's played with limited terrain. There are certain rules that aren't available to you. For example, magic is not traditional magic. It's more like an ability rather than, a traditional casting, unbinding interaction that you might be already familiar with. So yeah, add that on top, as well as there's a bunch of cards in decks and how that kind of plays out. So there's some really interesting things that come up from Spearhead. It is fast paced. It is dynamic. It is a simplified version of Age of Sigmar. I already mentioned, like, at a high level, it's played on a small board. That board has 2 designs. So I think I can't remember what they called it on the stream. It was like Jade and Fire maybe, or something like that. But you're playing on a board, one board that is Gairan inspired, the other one is Akshi inspired. And This is important because each of those boards has a different layout. The objectives are placed in different areas. They have a unique deck for the table. So I think it's called a twist deck that as you pick the sides, if you pick the Gairan side, clearly you play with the Gairan deck, or vice versa if you pick Akshi, and how that all kind of plays out with the attacker and defender rules. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about the rules, but the armies that you play are those predetermined ones, as I've already mentioned. So when I walked into the room, the super secret room, when we got to showcase and play with the demonstration, and there was obviously a little presentation that happened to explain what we're about to get into and some of the things that we needed to know. The spearheads were already set up, so it's not like I brought my own spearhead and I got to construct it or pick the one that I really wanted to pick. I got to walk around, and there was a bunch of armies already pre-painted by Games Workshop. There was Fire Slayers, Cities of Sigmar, Sylvaneth, Ossiarch Bone Reapers, Stormcast, the old box, so not the brand new one that's coming out for 4th edition, the one with Indrasa and the Annihilators and the Vanquishers. Gloomspite Gitz was there, as well as a bunch of other factions. So it was only a small, intimate room. Not all of the factions were out. I don't even think Flesh Eater Courts. No, Flesh Eater Courts, I don't think was out by then. I think their FOMO box was out, but their Vanguard Spearhead box wasn't even out yet. So I don't even think they were an option at that time. But it probably comes as no surprise that I picked Gloomspite Gitz as the army. So I got to play with a Loon Boss, 2 units of 5 Squig Hoppers, 3 Rockgut Troggoths, 20 Stabbers, Moon Clan Stabbers. They were separated as 2 units of 10, and they had a bit of recursion ability as well. So once they died, they got to come back in the movement phase, which is kind of cool. And my opponent was a Stormcast Eternals army, the old one. So old is 3rd edition. It's not sacrosanct or anything. We're talking about the current box, not the new sexy shiny 4th edition one. So it came with 3 Annihilators with shields, 10 Vanquishers. I can't remember if it was 2 units of 5 or 1 unit of 10. You had the Knight Vexilor, you had a Stormcast Chariot, and you had Indrasa. Now, when I very first saw this as my opponent, I took Indrasa for granted. I'm like, oh, you don't see Indrasa very much in Age of Sigmar. Nothing to really worry about. She's a monster hunter. I don't have any monsters. I don't need to worry about this. This is going to be interesting. Well, let me tell you that indeed I probably should have been worried. Put up the Ralph meme because I was in danger. She slaps. She slaps hard, real hard, and I'll tell you about that soon, but she slaps really good, and I've got 2 Indrasas at home. None of them have wings because I've used 1 set of wings for a Demon Prince, 1 set of wings for my Celestin Prime. As soon as I played this game, I'm like, I need a 3rd Indrasa, a proper Indrasa. She deserves it, and it's a very, very cool Spearhead army. But so one thing I found really interesting is that when I went through the army construction, you are set. You are set. You know, there is parameters on what you can do. So using the Gits box, for example, you can turn Squig Hoppers into Boingrot Bounders in traditional Age of Sigmar. That's not the case in Spearhead. So there are no rules, no options to take a Spearhead with Boingrots. It is very predetermined to use your hoppers. So that is fixed, but it doesn't mean that it's completely fixed. So your units are picked for you, but you do have some options to customize your force. So there's a little sheet that you got. I assume it's extracted from the Spearhead rulebook. But what you did get is an option for something called a regiment ability. So I think there was 2 different regiment option abilities. And then there was like an artifact. They call it an enhancement. You know, I don't think it's split out anymore. It's just enhancement. So I picked, what did I pick? I picked a battle trait to allow me, or regiment ability to bring back D3 slain Moon Clan Grots every hero phase, so I could bring back D3, and because there's no rally, there's no command points you can really use. It's not like I've got rally up my sleeve. So the idea was I thought I'd try to bring back some goblins and keep more bodies on the table, competing on objectives, yada yada yada. And then I picked an artifact, enhancement to get myself a -1 to hit penalty for attacks that target my loon boss. I thought, got to keep this guy on the board. Probably is going to help me with certain rules. Let's keep my general around as soon as possible. So there was a couple of different options. That was the one that I thought was most relevant at that particular time. And with Stormcast coming down, as long as I can stay on the board, the better. So that was the kind of like start of the list building. And I guess then we went into the phases of the how do we set up the pregame. So we both picked our unit's rules. We then roll off, and the attacker, so the defender, gets to pick which side of the board we use, whether it's Akshi or Gairan, as well as the deployment maps. So there are 2 different deployment maps. One goes horizontal, the other one goes diagonally. So you get a choice, and obviously, again, where the objectives are, where you place the terrain, how you maybe defend yourself. Will, there's some little mini games kind of before the game's even started, which is I guess it's going to add to variety, and it's going to help you have longevity to your games. If you played on the one map with one deployment zone, this thing would kind of get tired pretty quickly. But there's a lot of diversity, both how many spearheads are available, deployment maps, different types of cards. So that's good. Good sign. Good sign. So defender sets up the board. I'm standing up, by the way, trying to be dynamic, trying to like make sure that I've got some energy. It's a little bit late today, so bear with me, folks, if I happen to be darting around a little bit, moving my hands. So defender sets up the board. We all set up the terrain, which is great. There are some terrain restrictions, by the way, so you can't just put your terrain on the objective. It's kind of like Age of Sigmar currently. Keep it away from sides of the board, keep it away from objectives. There's certain limitations. But talking of terrain, I was very, very excited to see the terrain, because when I first saw it, I'm like, oh, cool, new Cities of Sigmar terrain. Then I looked a little closer, saw the Skaven inspired. Now, this is before we saw the previews that Skaven was in the launch box. This is well before any of this stuff. Again, this is well before you guys are already ahead. So I'm seeing this for the first time, seeing the new measurement tools, which have rats to measure out the numbers as well. I think it's magnetic as well, so you can kind of connect them up to have multiple. If I remember correctly, I remember just going, wow, like all these little 6-inch gauges that eventually kind of connect up, which I thought was pretty sweet at the time. I think I still do think it's pretty sweet. So terrain, you'll set the terrain up. It's cool. Then you kind of go into obviously deployment. So I think it's attacker deploys first, defender then deploys. And when you deploy all in one go. So attacker puts down their entire force, defender puts down their entire force. And what happened with me, because I was playing up against a Stormcast army, they had to put Indrasa and Annihilators in the sky. So I don't know if I told you this already, but the game is played over 4 turns. It's not 5, it's 4. And Indrasa and the Annihilators have to come down in turn 3. 1 and 2 is not an option. It's not like you've got to do it by turn 3. No, it's very specific, says they come down in turn 3. So it basically meant that I got to have the jump on victory points and board condition before board control before Stormcast got to hit the table. So I needed to maximize my victory points, maximize my objective control, hopefully minimize the damage coming into me, because Indrasa and the Annihilators were probably going to punch and punch hard. So I needed to push them out as far as possible, score as many victory points, and hopefully still come out on top. So that's the deployment phase done. Then comes down to, I guess, the other part of the pregame, the thing that's very unique to Spearhead, and that is, I already mentioned that there's no command abilities. There's no command points. Now there is command abilities, and I'll share how you get them. But what you know about Age of Sigmar, where you get a couple of command points, you can use them out through the turn, you've got a set of universal ones and maybe some special ones in your faction, throw that out the window. What you get is you get to draw cards, randomized cards from a battle tactic deck. Now, when you look at your battle tactic deck, you'll get 3 cards initially. You can only ever have 3 cards in your hand, if I remember correctly. You're limited with the amount of cards you need to have, long story short. The card has 2 different types of rules. You have actually there's 2 different types of rules on the one card, so it's not like it's one or the other. It's 2 things. You have a battle tactic to choose from, so a condition like have one unit on either side of the long board edge or the short board edge, and then it'll also have a rule for like a command ability. So basically, you can cash in that card for either the battle tactic or the command ability. And there's some really interesting command abilities. You've got, redeploy, you've got other things that you've got access to, like a hero phase heal. So basically, there's a trade off. Like, do you get more abilities and score later? Do you just score your victory points for holding objectives? There's some interesting little interplay there with which cards come up at what time and what you keep up in your deck. And the cards become really interesting as well because if you've read Warhammer Community for 4th edition, if you take the double turn, if you actively choose to take the double turn, you do not get to score a battle tactic, which, okay, all right, that makes sense. But what does that mean for me in Spearhead? Well, in Spearhead, it means you can't draw a card. So you are purely relying on either the cards you have up your sleeve, or if you've burnt them, you can only score what's on like holding objectives. You can't score any battle tactics. So it will limit the amount of victory points you score over those 4 turns. So fascinating, interesting play. What do? Do you take the double? Do you not take the double? Do you burn all your battle tactics quickly? Do you hold them up your sleeve for a later game? Do you use command ability versus battle tactic? Again, a lot of fun, a lot of interesting things, and there's no one quick answer when it comes to what you choose. So the game took about an hour. I know people have been throwing around the joke that you can do it over a lunch break, and that's actually true. At least, depending on where you are. Some Americans told me your lunch break is 30 minutes. I'm sorry, the game is not that quick. It'll take you about 40 minutes to an hour, depending on how quick you play, on how social, interactive, and like how you probably could belt this game out in 40 to 50 minutes on a chess clock, just really rapid, bang, 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 bang. But an hour is approximately between pre-game activity, playing through your turns, and then wrap up. You're probably sitting about an hour. So it's an hour game. My opponent's got half of his models in the sky, Annihilators in Drasa. So what do I do with my gits? Well, I move them forward. I screen off as much of the board as possible, putting my my grots in the middle, my rock guts in the behind the trogs, so behind the gits. I've got some hoppers on the flank to maybe steal some objectives and then kind of come through. Hopefully, zone out the Stormcast as much as possible. I think their deep striking comes in outside of 6. 9 inches would be way too much. Like I think it's a 6 incher. So obviously that means charging is a lot easier. 6-inch charge is not that hard. But I knew that I had to score as many points, victory points, control objectives, zone out as best as possible, reduce the amount of damage I took from the remaining models, the Chariot, the Vanquishers, and the Vexillor. So I had to minimize what was coming at me because I knew there was this big turn 3 wave coming. And that's exactly what I did. And then Indrasa and the Annihilators come down. I was pre-warned that Indrasa slapped hard, and they were definitely not wrong. Her shooting attack was something brutal, like 3 or 4 damage from like that spear, just like absolutely carved up. And then in combat, she was just cleaving through all of my idiots as well. And I honestly don't remember who won the game. Maybe I did. I can't remember. I truly, it was that long ago. I don't actually remember. But what I do remember is that the game was incredibly fun, incredibly dynamic. Um, it never felt like the game was over in turn 2 or turn 3. It was back forth, back forth. My opponent, as I've already mentioned, had a bunch of models in the sky, and the game ended close either way. Whoever won, whoever lose, doesn't matter. It was close. So even with half the army up in the sky, he was still able to score victory points and battle tactics as well. So it was a lot of fun, so much fun that I walked away and built myself a Nighthaunt spearhead. I'm currently working on an Idoneth Deepkin one. I have gone through my collection, and it's either inspired me to build models that I haven't built for a while. So like the Cities of Sigmar Great Cannon, which is a part of the Spearhead. I went in and looked at some of my models, and I looked at some of the models that were missing from my collection. So my Zinch, for example, was missing the Magister on disc. So I went out and grabbed the Magister on disc. My Daughters of Cain was missing the Medusae Iron Scale, I think it is, the that's in the Spearhead. So I made sure that I went and got that, and I started painting my Dark Riders up. And it's just like, there are models and armies that I'm interested and curious on painting, but they're ones that I would never go out and buy. So I would never do a 2,000 point army of Fire Slayers. I would probably never do a 2,000 point army of Ossiarch Bone Reapers. But would I paint them as a spearhead? Maybe. Does that lead me to a full 2,000 points if I enjoy it that much? Definitely not Ossiarch Bone Reapers, but maybe some of the other armies like Idoneth Deepkin or Nighthaunt might actually inspire me to then make this a full army. So that was kind of cool, and I got to apply some interesting techniques that I don't get to usually normally use on my other armies. But when I thought about Spearhead and I thought about, like, what is this format? Is it a format that I would play often? And I think the answer is yes. I wrote a little contribution piece to Goonhammer, the little roundtable. I'm now writing for Goonhammer, just actively contributing. And we had a roundtable discussion, and I thought about the Spearhead, and I'm like, right, it's got a lot of merit to it. It'll never take over from Age of Sigmar. Love the game. It's, a lot of complexity in the game, and we'll talk about 4th edition soon. But the game is interesting. Yes, you can play it at lunchtime, but I think about more about what are the other opportunities. I could run a equivalent to Friday Night Magic at a game store. Game stores, depending on what time you finish work, I often play on a Thursday night, and I can't start my game till like 6:30, closer to 7 o'clock when you add lunchtime, or dinner time. And do I want to start a 2,000 point game at 7 o'clock on a Thursday on a school night when I've got work in the morning? You might rush through the game, you finish at 10 or 11 at night. You don't always feel good, or at least I like to be in bed by, before 11. So like playing a 1 to 2 hours, 1 or 2 games on a weeknight, there's a lot of benefit to that. Obviously, I talked about the hobby opportunity and the painting and all that stuff, but I thought about some other things, whether it's side events to conventions or, on a Friday night, people, when you're setting up, you could run a little Spearhead event on the Friday while you're setting up to encourage people to help contribute. Or as a tournament organizer, I could help or run a Spearhead game with the buy buster, the person, if they happen to have a buy, or someone gets tabled really quickly, you could play Spearhead and keep people entertained. My wife and plenty of people I know would probably never play Age of Sigmar. That complexity of a 2,000 point game is definitely not for them. But if I think about having a Spearhead game, it might be a great way to introduce kids or partners or friends to the hobby, and start them off on their journey. Something self-contained, something easy, something that's not going to take a lot of time and effort, and the meta's not going to crazy evolve. And the thing that they bought is no longer not very good, and it's very self-contained. And I think there's a lot of great benefit to Spearhead. Now, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. I'm sure some of you are like, well, give me the juicy stuff. Like what isn't working? And it's hard to say after one game. But what I will say is, because of the self-contained, very simplistic nature of how you build and collect and paint, I do wonder what the longevity is when it comes to the 2 boards, 2 decks, 2 deployment maps. Now, is there a time in 12 to 24 months where we introduce another board, another set of decks to keep things kind of bit of variety? Because when you are playing this often, I think there's an opportunity, or I think there's a real area where you might learn your cards. You know that there are these 10 cards. I actually don't know how many cards there are in the deck, but there's X amount of cards in a deck. You know the sequence. You're like, right, well, I've got these 3 in my hand. It means these 7 are still to come up. And you can start to kind of predict and understand what's coming up. And you might lose that spicy variety that I think Spearhead brings to the fold. So bringing in new decks, new cards, not too many. So I think it's got to be simple. We can't lock them into white dwarves and seasons and such a way that somebody is playing one series and you're start chasing the Spearhead meta eventually, like what we've seen in Underworlds and things like that. But how do you keep up the variety? How do you allow people to play this on a regular basis but not get bored of it? I think that's the real opportunity for Games Workshop. Don't bring in a General's Handbook equivalent for Spearhead, but how do you bring in those alternative decks and alternative boards on a semi-regular 1 to 2 year kind of basis? That's probably my concern. But overall, game's really good. Quite enjoy it. And I think if I look at that that AEW celebrity match, moving the quality aside of the stream, and yes, the lighting wasn't great, and the commentary, there was a lot of things that could have been improved at a much greater reach. I think when we think about what the actual game was shown off, I think people were very excited and very enthusiastic to learn more and play more about Spearhead. So that's Spearhead in a nutshell, at least my first experience. And I'm gonna have a cup of tea. I think I've spilled a lot of tea in that first little kind of monologue. It's hard not talking to people. Normally I've got 2 people to talk to at this particular point. So I hope you're talking to me either in Discord or leaving me comments in the comment section, because I'd be curious to hear from you if you did either capture the stream or you've been watching the Warhammer community stuff around Spearhead, what you're thinking, and has it actually inspired you yet to start a Spearhead, especially one outside of your current faction. So peppermint tea done. Let's talk about the main event, or the one that probably you're all here to talk about, and that is 4th edition Age Sigmar. So different event, different time. So it wasn't like I went from Spearhead directly into 4th edition. There was some time in between, and I got the chance to play a full game. It wasn't 2,000 points. I think it was about 1,500 points. About 1,500 points. I played my Sons of Behemat, and I went up against a Blades of Khorne army. So how did this all come about? Because Spearhead, when I walked into the room, all of the Spearheads were self-contained on the table. I just had to pick my flavor and have fun with it. When it come to the 4th edition, I being invited to play in this demonstration or exhibition of 4th edition, I got to submit my my units that I own and how many man crushers I've got and what variety of mega gargants I've got. I submitted that in advance, and my list got created for me. So customizing, tailoring, force construction at that particular point was beyond me. I just got told bring Gatebreaker, War Stomper, and 3 Man Crushers. I think that was my army. I'm pretty sure that was my army. That sounds about right. 500, 500, 500. It definitely wasn't 2K. I swear it wasn't 2K, or maybe I'm just losing the plot. I was, who knows? Who knows? Who knows? But that was kind of what I remember playing with. So I had my Gatebreaker, my War Stomper, and my 3 Man Crushers. I remember leaving Brod at home. I'm like, oh, poor Brod. Poor Brod has to stay at home for once. I haven't left home without Brod for a while. My Khorne opponent was playing a bit of a mixed force. So I probably reckon it was about 50-50. It was pretty close to being balanced between demons and mortals. There was at least 1 priest. I think there was a couple of priests. There was flesh hounds. There was bloodletters. There was blood reavers or blood warriors. There might have been some blood crushers, a bit of a mixed force, a bit of a mixed corn force. And as I mentioned at the top of the video, we didn't have the benefit of Warhammer community. So all of those articles talking about the changes to command points and endless spells and wizards and priests and all those wonderful things available to you right now, right this very second. Again, I had a half an hour talk, told us about what was coming up, what the changes were, try to digest them in the moment and learn all of these like a big truck hitting us in the face. And it was fun. It was interesting. It was, again, a very test and learn everything I know about third edition, put it to the side. Some things were very familiar. It's not like the game was completely rebooted and was starting from scratch. There's a lot of things that in third edition are still true today, but there's a bunch of things that have been fundamentally changed, whether it is, mysterious landscapes in, not having, arcane, mystical, and damned, things like heroic actions or monstrous rampages. Heroic actions are completely gone. No mystic shield. So if I think about like if my opponent was going to hit me in the face really quick, really hard, maybe there's like some really powerful shooting that's coming into my face. I don't have finest hour. I don't have mystic shield to kind of safe stack and try to protect my mega gargan as soon as possible. Hell, I didn't even have a wizard. Very much. Even some other things like objective control when it comes to the objectives. Like, for example, that's the new size of the objective. It's no longer the 6-inch kind of area. It's now this 40 mil and then 3-inch, and then kind of it's a bit like 40K. I think it's a similar kind of size to 40K. There was a lot of things I'm like, is this still true? Like, we know Gargans can dominate on an objective. How will they dominate here? In fact, you probably would assume they would dominate better because a 130 mil base on that is a lot easier to control, especially with the 3-inch combat area, than it would on a 6-inch objective. So again, either way, a lot of assumptions to test out. Certainly very interesting. And if you haven't seen this play out already, there was a masterclass between Lumineth and Skaven, again from the Dallas Open. So you can see some of these experiences kind of play out, and you can kind of see how it all kind of unfolds. But I'll go through some of the things that I have learned. I can't go through every little piece of detail because I'll be here for 10 years, and some things I can't share with you at this particular point, but know that I will share at a later stage. The game itself feels, smells, looks like Age of Sigmar. Again, like there are some nuances, some changes, some improvements, and things that are different, and maybe you think of as negative, but the game as a very take a high level view at it, looks and feels like Age of Sigmar. The game goes for 3 hours approximately. Probably like 4 hours when for people like me who like to talk a lot of shit. Now it's about 3 hours. The double turn's still in play. There's still endless spells. There is still battle tactics, and we'll talk about battle tactics in a minute. The turn sequence is very similar. Again, it's very much Age of Sigmar. So like there will be a learning curve, but it won't be steep for you. It'll just be unlearning certain things. But if you're like me and you've gone from first edition to second edition to third to fourth, in second edition there was no grand strategies. There was no battle tactics. Like there was a lot of things that have changed. Like in first edition, there was no command points. First edition, I think your general could issue one command. It was like what's on its war scroll or inspiring presence. So all of this stuff that we've benefited from, whether it's triumphs in second edition, I think it was, old first edition, you could buy CP, so you could pay 50 points per for every 50 points you could buy an extra CP, and Sylvaneth used to love that. A lot of things have changed, but fundamentally Age of Sigmar has been exactly the same. So I played Suns, as I've already mentioned, and Suns felt like Suns. They were still big idiots standing on big circles and, using their combat threats to hopefully defend and hold off and stay on an objective as long as possible. They still like to charge. They still like to do damage. Gatebreaker does gatebreakery things. Now, there's absolutely been some changes. I told you Finest Hour disappeared. The monstrous rampages, no roar, no stomp, being able to Titanic Jewel, those things are out the window. Suns did have some rampages now. They're called rampages, not monstrous rampages. I don't think there's any universal ones. But Suns as a battle trait did have some special rules, right? So there'll be some things that not completely losing out here, and I got to apply some of those, which was a lot of fun. They still felt like Suns, whether it's 4th edition, 3rd edition, 2nd edition. Suns were Suns, just a different space. You know what I'm trying to say. Corn still feel like Corn. Corn's table, I was going to call it the blood rights table. That's Daughters of Cain. Your murder table, your blood, whatever your blood table is. There is still commonality to that. It's just going to be different. It's just there are things that are different. You probably noticed it on the masterclass stream. It's a very simplified version of the game, which has benefits and negatives. Again, we'll talk about that. I didn't have the pleasure of playing any wizards. Unfortunately, I really wanted to see the manifestations come to life in my game. Suns have no native wizards. Khorne certainly has no native wizards. But what I did get to experience is priests. And I really got to enjoy seeing the priests come to life and being able to roll a chanting dice, roll a 2-up, and then you can either use the chanting dice immediately, or you can save them up for a better chant, or you could some chants, I think from memory, there's like if you roll a 10 plus, you get extra boost, or you can do it to multiple units. So being able to save up, obviously the risk is your priest dies and then you lose all your points altogether, but being able to generate better, stronger, more often prayers was really cool. And that tied in nicely with the new command ability called Magical Intervention, where you can cast or chant in your opponent's hero phase. Now, there is a negative to the cast. I think it's like -1 from the casting or chanting roll, but it does mean that if you're going second in the battle round and you're saving up for a big spell or prayer unleash, you could use one of those command points to start generating those prayer dice, so that when it hits your turn, assuming that priest is still alive or you didn't roll a 1, then you would have, I guess, more dice up your sleeve, or you'd have a much better chance of hitting that 7 plus or 8 plus or whatever it might be. So I think that's really cool. I, to no surprise, wanted to use the 2 other new command abilities. So wanting to use countercharge, wanting to use power through. I wanted to use them as often as possible because, one, I'm a destruction player. I want to charge. I want to get into your face. But there was other areas where I could, opponents would try to avoid a Gargant because they don't want to draw it into combat. Well, guess what? I'm going to charge you anyway with a countercharge. Problem is that costs 2 CP. So that takes like 50% of the command points up my sleeve. But knowing that I can countercharge does change the way that your opponent might think about where they charge or where they move, and not allowing you to countercharge into a unit on an objective that they didn't want to bring into combat. Now you countercharge into them, you take the objective off them, you deny them a battle tactic. Some really interesting counterplay there. And power through really worked in my favor because, again, I'm a Suns player, 35 wounds on my model, which means I can basically go through almost every model in the game. At the end of the combat phase, I can basically move through, do some damage, and reposition, board control, get on an objective, yada, yada, yada. Very, very cool. Very, very costly. Problem is I burned through my command points. So lesson number 1 is to not, just because you can, doesn't mean you should. just because you can do a magical intervention, that is one of your 4 command points, assuming that you haven't gained extra from being an underdog or some other way. Just realize that there's no heroic leadership to get yourself an extra CP on a 4+. There's no other real easy ways to get yourself an extra CP. So budget for 4, plan for 4. If you get extra, that's a bonus to you. The underdog mechanic I thought was fascinating because for years and years and years, we have tried to disincentivize the double turn. I know it's a big bugbear for 40k players who don't want to come across because they don't like the double turn. But for us, like Age of Sigmar players, we've gotten used to it. It's a part of our game. It is what it is. You plan to lose the double turn. You make sure you got your buffs up. You've got yourself an extra CP, and you pray for the worst. You hope for the best, or you plan for the worst. You hope for the best. But what's fascinating with the underdog mechanic is that the player who has the lowest victory points in the battle round, so start of the battle round, you had the lowest victory points, you will get yourself the underdog status. And what that will do is every battle plan will have what's called a twist, or it'll have some type of benefit or rule that will apply to the underdog. You see it in Spearhead. Spearhead has something similar, although it's around the cards that you draw. This one is about specific to the battle plan. So you would have heard Tom Maudsley, for example, if you watch the masterclass, talk about at the end. He did a little interview with Nicholas as well, the 2 players, and they were talking about the underdog mechanic and how deliberately in the first turn, they were trying to be under victory points, maybe only 1 behind, hopefully. So then when they walked into turn 2, they had the underdog status, giving them more benefits, but then they could go in and claw back the lead or claw back the deficit, and use that underdog status to really, exceed or to propel their army with the momentum from turn 2 to turn 3, which we know is traditionally very important for Age of Sigmar. Anyway, love the underdog mechanic, and in addition, the fact that if you do take the double turn, if you elect to choose the double turn, so not if your opponent gives it to you, but if you were to go, right, I went from bottom of turn 1, I'm going to take the top of turn 2 because I won the priority roll. Having that denial of a battle tactic, and basically giving it up, could be the difference between you podiuming at a tournament, depending on how we score 4th edition. It could be the difference towards the end where actually it was the bad move and the opponent could still score their battle tactics, score 1, 2 more, and those 4 points could have been the difference. So, do you take the double turn? Do you not take the double turn? Is now a real decision you need to think about. So I love that as an ability because, especially some armies, the double turn means the game could be over pretty quickly, and no one likes a double turn from KO, for example. So any disincentivization is probably a good thing, but if you do, you can still reap the rewards. Just make sure that it's worth it for you. A couple of other things I had written down, kind of like just what I wanted to talk about. No grand strategy. Love it. I hate grand strategies. It's like if you've got a good one that complements your army style, amazing. If not, it's just another thing you have to do. So, I found most of my armies, the grand strategy is kind of annoying. It's not like Zinch where it's like have X amount of destiny dice, or Daughters of Cain. It's like make sure everyone in your army fights or dies. Like, cool, that complements what I want to do. But actually, no, in a way, if I run bow snakes, that's really annoying because now I got my bow snakes into combat, even though I want to shoot with them and I want to protect them as much as possible. So I need to kill them, I have to be killed or get into combat. So grand strategies were dumb. I just didn't like them. They're gone. Don't have to worry about it. But what's fascinating is that battle tactics have been reined in. So in the rules that was given to me, there was six battle tactics, I think it was. They were the universal ones. So I think Warcoms mentioned that they are seasonal, so they're tied to the General's Handbook. So there was 6 or 8 Don't quote me on this. Again, working from memory here. You got a fixed number of battle tactics, and then there is 2 for each Grand Alliance. So 2 for death, 2 for destruction, 2 for chaos, 2 for order. For me, playing Suns, this was not easy because having a fixed limit amount of battle tactics that are very generic, I found myself running out of battle tactics with Suns very quickly. My Chaos opponent didn't really have that problem. If I was to play Gits, where I've got more units on the board, or maybe if I had the Regiment of Renown, for example, and I could bring in assuming that the Gits Regiment of Renown of Hoppers and, the Gobapalooza and things like that, assuming that they are brought into 4th edition, having more units on the board would have helped me score more battle tactics, but just having those 2 megas and 3 man crushers did feel, maybe it was 3 megas, and I can't remember. It's been that long. I just found I ran out of models, I ran out of units, and I ran out of battle tactics because when Suns is in combat, you're stuck in combat. So anything that's like surround and destroy, it's like have 3 models, on different board edges. Well, if I've only got 4 models, that's really hard. So that's a choice that I've made. Keep it in mind why the Regiment of Renown can actually be really helpful. My point is that the battle tactics were actually hard, which is a good thing. It means that scoring 5 out of 5 is actually good gameplay. It's not just assume that you're going to go 5 out of 5. It's now actually a proper fight. So thinking about your army construction, thinking about your battle tactics is probably more important than ever before. The fixed 4 command points, as I've already mentioned, was interesting. Not spending them too quickly. They are your allocations. So once you kind of play around with it a few times, you get familiar, you get comfortable, you know what's important versus what's nice to have. Do I keep it always up my sleeve for an all-out attack and an all-out defense? Maybe it's having counter charge and then 2 all-out defenses. So think about your army, think about the types of commands that I guess make the most, because you are very limited with the amount of command points you got. What else? Safe stacking really wasn't a thing. When you think about Finest Hour's gone, Mystic Shield's gone, think about those high rend attacks really do significant damage. So, sometimes when I run my, Ren 2 or Ren 3 models, if you have a Finest Hour, a Mystic Shield, and all that defense, you're sitting on cover, you can really safe stack to the 9s where those Ren 2 and Ren 3 attacks are just nothing. It's just like flat nothing, which is kind of annoying. You really want those high rend attacks to go through, which means that, mortal wounds or mortal damage, became the popular build. But what you find is without the safe stacking of Finest Hour and Mystic Shield, then you add the extra rules, the new rules like anti-infantry, anti-hero, anti-monster, you start to see Rend really, really play an important role, which is why I can't wait to see Nighthaunt, right? If people are going to build into high Rend and maybe mortal damage is not as common as it is today, all of a sudden you start to see something like Nighthaunt goes, low Rend, I don't care. What does that mean to the meta? Excited about that. Obviously didn't get to see it play out, but seeing my sons, I certainly felt when they hit harder, the damage went through more. Having things like crit mortals or crit to wound, so 6s equal a auto wound or a just instead of just mortal damage. That was nice. What else? Terrain maps were cool. Not having mystical terrain was interesting. So relying again on, arcane, mystical, damned. Yes, there's places of power. That's a really interesting mechanic. Although if your wizard is activating it on your opponent's turn, just be mindful because on a roll of a 1, you will take damage. And if you are a non-wizard activating a place of power, it's a nice way to get an unbind. Or what's also happened, I've seen, is Morathi Kane activating it, rolling a 1, and she takes 3 mortal wounds before the game's really even started. So we all know the importance of getting early damage onto Morathi. If she does it to herself, be careful. Be careful, because it's not a good start. And don't do that. The games went for 5 battle rounds. They all went back and forth. They were tight. They were interactive. There's times where in third edition, you'll be playing with your phone and you'll be just, disengaged. I didn't feel that. And yes, I wasn't allowed to play with my phone, but I was constantly in the game, interacting with my opponent. There's none of this weird start of phase, end of phase. It's just like one flat little block that you can. My opponent does his rules, and then I can interact at the end, and then it's much easier. It's much simpler. The timing isn't there to screw you over. And we've all been in times where it's like, I should have declared something at the start of the turn. I've missed it. Can we go back? And there's that awkward conversation, or we miss an interaction. It's just clean. Often you see games kind of ended by turn 3, or at least the outcome is determined by turn 3. And I can honestly say that I didn't see that in the game that I played and the games I observed around me as I walked the tables, like chatted to the other players. I didn't feel that. I didn't see that, which is only a good thing. Nobody wants a game to finish early. And you want the game to be able to swing. And we saw it again on the masterclass, where it looked like Tom was out of it very early on. Lumineth had taken a lead. Then all of a sudden, I think it turn 3 happened, and Skaven kind of swung back. And then right at the very end, Lumineth swung it back in their favor. So you want that back forth, as opposed to someone just takes a lead and then it's like a crushing defeat towards the end. And you almost want to concede. It's like, look, I know how this game's going to end. Let's just get this over and done with. Didn't see that, didn't feel that. I think for me, again, it's not sunshine and rainbows. And I'm sure you're like, well, what was the negatives, or what are the areas that we should watch out for? And I think, let me have a sip of drink for a second. I've talked a lot. A big monologue. I think for me, the biggest thing that I'm curious and or worried about is the simplicity. I liked the game mechanic simplicity. So again, the sequencing I talked about earlier, there's not a lot of there's not as much disruption, and the game seems to flow nicer. That's my first experience. Where I think my curious or my concern or worry is from a list building perspective. Now, I come from a world where I started Warhammer in fantasy battles, where I could customize my army to the individual number of models in a unit. I can have units of 11 and 14 and weird numbers. Why? Dryads come in boxes of 16, even though the unit size in the Sylvaneth battle tome has never been 16. It's like 10 to 20 to 30. So that list customization has always been important to me. But when I look at what was given to me on the day, I was given a set of battle traits that I could choose one. And it's not like currently where I have like Stomp a Tribe and Take a Tribe, and the different sub-faction, or now known as battle formations. They didn't seem as impactful as they are in third edition. The fourth edition ones seem tamer. Now that could be a good thing. You've always seen like certain sub-factions dominate. You see this really high rate of popularity in a particular build, because often it's the most broken way to play a faction, or the most value that you get from a army list, whether it's unlocking battle line, whether it's getting particular rules, whether it's something that basically allows you to get a significant advantage, and maybe the unit value. I'm trying to think of an example on the spot here where a unit's value in one faction is superior or not as good as in another faction or sub-faction. Sorry, you see it often. I'm sure as soon as I turn off the video, I'll remember like 5 different examples. But when you look at the battle traits and the enhancements available to you, and even like, the battalions. Now, we haven't seen the formations and the regiments and what benefits the General's Handbook's going to give us. And Obviously, the battle tomes when they come out is going to change things. But right now, I can take a bunch of battalions and go warlord and get myself an extra artifact. I get myself an extra triumph. I can get extra ways to customize my force. Or if one drop is important to me, I go battle regiment, or I reduce the amount of drops that I've got. That really isn't an option in 99% of the cases. So how I can customize and tailor my force and really build a force, like when I build my Taker tribe, my Gargants of that particular tribe really feel powerful. They really feel thematical. Now, I wonder with the generic battle formations, are we going to see more mixed armed forces? So, like you call them soup, you could call them like they just. It's not a bad thing. It could be a good thing, right? Like I told you earlier, my corn opponent was a um, mixed of mortals and demons. You don't really see that very often. You often see people go all in on demons or all in on mortals, or it's like a 70-30 split. You know, my gits are exactly the same. I usually build all into mostly squigs or mostly trogs. Now it feels like you are building a bit of a mixed force, and the I don't know, is that a good or a bad thing? I don't know. Part of me thinks it's cool to have a mixed force. The other thing is I like the idea of having a real thematical force, like you see the armies of renown. I like that idea, and I like to be able to go all in on trogs and have a trog benefit. I don't know. I think for some people, you're going to really like the simplicity, and I like that the sub faction, aka the what's it called, the traits. I said it earlier. You might like that it's been reduced. For some people, you might find that simplicity is too simple for you, and you'd like a little bit more complexity. So I hope, while the indexes are simpler, maybe hopefully we see battle tomes. I was going to say codexes because as I did my research and looked at 40k 10th edition, and they did the exact same thing. They simplified things, indexed things. They brought out codexes, and it seems like the codex balance is about the same. It seems like they're actually not going too crazy. Where I think in 9th edition you saw like win rates of like 70% and 80% with a new codex drop because they were just so busted. Seems like they've got it in balance right now. I'm not a 40k player, don't quote me, but from what I hear, it's much more in control, and I hope the same is true. I hope that with the battle tomes bring in more list design, more ways to build a customized force than what we're seeing in what at least what I saw, what I was given. I was not given the full index. I was just given the rules that I could play with. Um, that's my worry. That's my worry. I don't want power creep, but at the same time, I don't want a super 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 simple game. I like the simplicity on the tabletop because it means that you're worrying less about the rules and worrying less about what your opponent has and worrying less about the battle tactics, and and you're more in the game. You're more focused on the interactions and responding to your opponent, and a lot of counterplay. That's what I really like. But overall, look, I really enjoyed 4th edition. I enjoyed Spearhead. I enjoyed 4th edition. And after my first experience playing 4th edition, it was hard to go back to 3rd edition. It really was. It felt like, why am I even bothering this? Because 4th edition is so different, but it's so fun. And with new problems to solve, I was pretty excited to go in and start looking a little further and obviously watch what happened at Dallas, watch what happens kind of on Warcom, and get closer to it as the book drops. So it's kind of like my summary, and it's an hour ramble that I hope that you either enjoyed, and maybe you're listening to me on your car ride, or you're painting, or whatever you're doing. I don't do these very often. I thought this is a perfect reason to get on to my soapbox, share with you my experience playing 4th edition and playing Spearhead. Again, it was one experience. So after one experience, I probably don't have enough critical analysis to break down every little feeling that I had. And maybe some of those worries that mine are not real. Some things maybe I've completely overlooked because I haven't played enough games. And as I get more games under my belt, we'll understand the impact's greater. And maybe there's some real busted stuff when it comes to a particular faction because something is either in or isn't. And what, who knows? Who knows? But I think for me, I'm excited to be on the journey. I can't wait to play more 4th edition. I can't wait to break down that masterclass a little further and kind of understand how those two are thinking and playing the game. And I can't wait to get onto the tabletop and talk to you more about 4th edition. So if you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments section. If you want to see more of these types of videos, off the cuff, kind of just random thinking, sipping peppermint tea, 9 o'clock at night, just having a chat, something that again, normally I'm the person interviewing and not giving as many opinions. So yeah, I feel like I'm at a point where I should just hang up. Thank you all for joining me. I hope you found that valuable. I hope you found that interesting. Leave me a comment if you want to chat more. Discord, I'm always available to chat. We have great 4th edition areas and Spearhead areas where people are talking about the information being released and sharing thoughts and comments and discussing things. And then when rules come out for your faction, which there's going to be plenty of faction focuses coming up, I'm sure each of those factions are going to break down those rules and start strategizing what works, what doesn't work, what's hot, what's not, what we start to think about from the meta perspective. I'm going to end here. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for joining. I'm going to go continue my tea. Thanks for hanging around until the end. I hope you enjoyed that video and you walked away with a few new ideas. Now, if you did, I would love it if you pressed like on the video, as well as left me a comment with your thoughts. The conversation will continue over on Discord, and the link is down below in the episode description. I also want to give a massive shout out to the AoS Coach patrons and YouTube members who are supporting the channel and the growth that you're seeing here. So cheers, you are all bloody legends. And until next time, don't roll a 1-1 on a spellcast.